Hello, and welcome back to the Fireside Lit Book Club, a quiet, candlelit corner of the internet where we read slowly, think deeply, and speak authentically about our experiences. I'm Lindsay, and I invite you to join me by the fire as we explore the soul of a book, the beauty it reveals, the questions it asks, and the ways it helps us understand life, identity, and meaning just a little more clearly. Today we are stepping into the colorful, quirky, cozy fictional town of Stars Hollow and immersing ourselves in all things Gilmore Girls, particularly when it comes to the show's emphasis on literature, film, and pop culture. This episode is obviously a bit of an outlier. It's a bit of a deviation from what we normally talk about here at Fireside Lit, but I really was excited about the idea of recording this episode and speaking to Gilmore Girls because I would say this episode is equal parts nostalgia and reflection for me. I love the show. I've been a fan for years at this point. I've probably watched it a total of 5 times, including all throughout my pregnancy and quite often postpartum as well. And I also really love its emphasis on the way reading shapes who we are and what we imagine for our lives, the way it did for the main character, Rory Gilmore. Now, before I dive too far in, I should probably back up a bit for those of you who are not fans of Gilmore Girls. If you've never seen the show before, stop what you're doing, pause this episode, and go watch it immediately. I say this because if you're here, there's a very good chance you love books as much as I do, and Gilmore Girls is in a lot of ways a dedication to books, literature, and knowledge. The main character, Rory, is raised by a single mother and has her sights set on studying at Harvard from the time she's a little girl. She's extremely bright and book smart and spends pretty much all of her free time exploring different books and reading broadly across genres. Apart from the show's unique characters and witty dialogue, I absolutely love the producer Amy Sherman Palladino for this reason. What really sets Gilmore Girls apart is the way it normalizes intellectual curiosity, how it treats reading and knowledge as part of a full, joyful life. Books and higher education take center stage. There are even full lists online that catalog every single book mentioned in the show, which is, I believe, over 300. And you better believe I have perused that list many a time, adding selections and filling in the gaps on my own to-be-read list. Ultimately, beyond the nostalgia and caffeine-fueled humor, the show is really about words. About curiosity, ideas, conversation, and intellectual and emotional growth. It's a world built for people who love books, coffee, autumn, and higher education, and that brings us to the first layer of its magic, the literary heart of Gilmore Girls. One of the reasons I think Gilmore Girls continues to be popular decades after its heyday in the early 2000s is because it doesn't just use books as decoration. The dialogue, humor, and even the relationships are steeped in literature, music, and art. I absolutely loved the fact that in season 1, there's this scene where Lorelai is questioning why Rory needs like 5 different recreational reading books to bring to school that day. And Rory is pretty much able to justify each one, just for a different moment in her day. I am also that girl who has to take the appropriate book with me, no matter where I go, if there's going to be any kind of a wait. Definitely if I'm going to be going on any kind of trip, I just always have a book to turn to, and I'm very meticulous about the ones that I choose for those outings or trips. And I'm still obsessed with the fact that Rory has a book in her purse that she brings to her school dance because she just didn't know if she would need it. So from that very first season, we're able to see how books are nothing short of life for Rory. And she inherits, I think, at least part of this love from her mother, though perhaps in a more intense way. Books and magazines are piled everywhere in their home, and in Rory's valedictorian speech, she explicitly thanks Lorelai by saying, "My mother never gave me any idea that I couldn't do whatever I wanted or be whomever I wanted to be. She filled our house with love and fun and books and music, unflagging in her efforts to give me role models from Jane Austen to Eudora Welty to Patti Smith." I not only always weep every time I see this, this scene where Rory gives this speech, but I also laugh hysterically when Luke begins to cry and then tells everyone else that they're all freaks for not blubbering. So Rory's speech is a huge tip-off, even if we don't see it as clearly in Lorelai's life as we do in Rory's, that Rory obviously was encouraged to read growing up and read voraciously, likely by example. Lorelai and Rory's quick wit is rooted in language. Every quip, every reference feels like a little nod to the joy of knowing things, of being well-read. The way they talk to each other, the rhythm of their conversations, it's all very much built on the idea that being smart and curious is fun. And then, there's the town of Stars Hollow itself, which is a town that feels like a true-to-life storybook. Fun fact, that town is actually a set, if you didn't know it. I actually visited it at Warner Brothers Studios when I was 13. I was auditioning for a movie out there, and the tragedy of this at the time is that I did not know what I was looking at. I stood directly in front of the Stars Hollow gazebo, and I was like, oh, that's nice. And this was many, many years before my introduction to the show. So I'm hopeful that maybe one day I'll get to go back and kind of relive that moment through the eyes of having seen and loved this show now for years and years. But anyway, what I love most at the end of the day about this show is that it very much does make intellect feel warm, never snobbish. It basically suggests, hey, you can love Dickens and donuts. You can read Virginia Woolf and eat takeout Chinese. It celebrates intelligence, imagination, and down-to-earth living all at the same time. And speaking of striking that balance, Rory Gilmore's character manages to do that brilliantly. She's studious, introspective, and quietly passionate about the written word, but what makes her three-dimensional is that she's not just limited by genre. She doesn't just stick to the classics or what you'd expect of the stereotypical smart girl. She reads everything from Moby Dick to Harry Potter, from the collected stories of Eudora Welty to The Kite Runner. And that's what makes her reading life so aspirational. She reads for growth, for empathy, and for joy. Not because she wants to show off, but because she's genuinely interested in the world and in seeing things from new and different perspectives. And what that teaches us, I think, is that reading widely isn't about accomplishment. It's about becoming a fuller, more compassionate person. And Rory's character embodies that beautifully. She obviously reads to expand herself, not to necessarily set herself apart from anyone else. What I also love is that for Rory, books are both a refuge and a mirror. She reads perpetually through all the seasons of her life, through heartbreak, stress, celebration, and the calmer, more uneventful moments. And that's something I can deeply relate to. Reading has always been the quiet anchor of my days, even during times when none of my other interests or hobbies felt attainable or possible. For instance, I had a really rough time postpartum. I'm going on a year since I gave birth, and I've only just begun to feel more like myself again. For a while, it was physically impossible for me to get to the gym to lift heavy, which I love to do, or even to go for walks. Reading was pretty much the only hobby left for me that was readily accessible. From a few days postpartum when I was laid up in bed to all the times I've been sick in life or haven't felt well in general, books have really always been there for me. They've provided me with an invaluable connection to the human race when I felt isolated, and they've given words and life to emotions I felt that seemed too deep or inaccessible for anyone in my life to understand. And they've also helped me grow and change my mind about things as I've considered them through a new lens. And I think that's what Rory does in Gilmore Girls. Part of the show's magic is how it captures the habit of reading as highly versatile and evergreen. The cozy corners, the diner scenes, the snow that Lorelai loves so much, and the foliage as the seasons change. They all work together to create this sort of aesthetic sense of comfort. And beneath it all, there's depth. A sense that every conversation, every book that Rory reads is about becoming more thoughtful and self-aware. I think that's a significant reason why Gilmore Girls continues to resonate with viewers today. It ties intellect to intimacy. It reminds us that reading is both personal and communal, and that stories connect us to ourselves and to one another. And when it comes to forming those connections, Lorelai and Rory's coveted mother-daughter banter relies heavily on not only bookish references, but on references to film, history, and pop culture. Their relationship and the way they interact is by far the show's most iconic feature, but what makes it special is how it turns knowledge into connection. Their conversations are a kind of intellectual play, and we get the sense that these two women are equally and perfectly matched in terms of both their razor-sharp wit and intellect. They honestly make curiosity and knowledge look cool, and that's something I've always loved. You know, how the show celebrates intelligence without taking itself too seriously. It reminds us that being well-read doesn't have to mean being pretentious. It can simply mean you're an inquisitive person and have a thirst for life and experience. And that's something I really feel personally we could use more of as a society. So I'll conclude by just pointing out that Rory's reading life offers so many small but profound lessons. The first is curiosity over conformity. She doesn't read what's popular or expected. She reads what interests her. I think that's something we as bookworms can all learn from, because a lot of the time there can be pressure to read more of the classics or, the great works, and while that is an admirable and worthwhile goal, it is equally important to enrich our emotional landscape with contemporary works that resonate with us as well. Read what speaks to you. Read widely, read across genres to learn a bit of something about everything if you enjoy learning. Or, if this is more your jam, devote entire shelves to romance or self-help or science books. That's equally valid. The second thing I believe we can learn from Rory is she treats reading as a lifelong pursuit, something that grows with her. Books that comfort her as a teenager challenge her as an adult. And for us, this can look like periodically returning to our favorite books from years past to see how we have changed and grown since we've last picked them up. And lastly, Rory understands that it's not just what you read, but how deeply you let it affect you. And that's something I try to remember in my own reading life. When you read slowly and intentionally, when you let a book move through you, it stays. It changes the way you see things. So maybe the takeaway here is simple. Don't read merely to finish or to check books off a to-be-read list. Read to feel. Read to become. Thank you so much for joining me by the fire today, and maybe go watch the pilot episode of Gilmore Girls as a little ceremonial viewing following this episode. As always, be well and happy reading.